I've had a chat to a heap of people over the last 10, 15 years or so on all sorts of different subjects, and I try and be pretty cool, calm and collected, but I must say, our podcast today was with a man who I was very, very excited to have a sit down with. Maybe even a little nervous, I'm not sure. He's such a beautiful man in terms of his nature and who he is that there was no need to be nervous. I was just excited. He is an author, a speaker, a thought leader. We're going to have a chat to Andy Crouch. He's a partner for theology and culture at Praxis. He's going to talk to us specifically today around the role of redemption and what does it play in our current culture. Looking forward to hearing from him. We're going to play this interview. I had the opportunity to sit down with him after a recent conference he was at here in Australia. Just before we get to that conversation, would you please like, rate, review this podcast? It helps us get it out to more people. It's always free. We just love sharing these stories. All right, let's have a chat with Andy. Andy, thank you so much for your time.
It is a pleasure, Clayton. Thank you for the invitation.
It's wonderful to have you here. And I got to say that, I've interviewed a lot of people over the years, and often it's like I know exactly where I want to go. And there was so much of what I could talk to you about that I had to, it took me actually hours to work out where it was. But it actually ended up coming down to that word, redemptive. So you have just spent some time around here. And so we want to talk about redemptive. We want to talk about being redeemed. And in a culture around Australia and New Zealand, maybe it's not something we talk about all that much. Could I get perhaps your first definition as you hear the word redeemed or redemptive? What does that mean to you?
Oh, yes. I'd love to define it and talk about it because I think it's actually one of the most powerful concepts available to us as we think about what's needed in our world. And I don't know, I'm from the U.S., and in the U.S. context, it sort of sounds like a religious word, and it's a word that's often used in religious contexts, but it is actually an economic word. So redeem goes back to the Latin, and it means to buy back. It's to buy something back that somehow ownership has been transferred to someone else, and you pay often a price to get it back to its kind of rightful place. And this goes way back to the ancient world, where really two things ended up in need of redemption. One was the land. So the ancient world, and I'm thinking of the ancient Near East, including the world of the Bible, what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. In this world, most wealth was in land, and most of families' property was in land. But if something went wrong, a medical emergency, a famine, lots of things can go wrong, a war, you might lose your land as a family, and you didn't have anything else. And so to be without land, to be unable to farm for yourself and maybe produce a little extra for the community was a real crisis. And so when land was redeemed, it was actually bought back and put back in the kind of ownership and stewardship of the family that had always had it and who had lost it through some calamity. The other thing that could get lost in the ancient world was your freedom as a person. And, it's been 150 years since we had anything like this in, say, the English-speaking world. But it's only that long ago that people would end up so much in debt that they would for a while we called it indentured servitude. But in the ancient world, it was really slavery. You would get sold into slavery to pay off debts that you probably could never pay. And so you could redeem land, but you could also redeem a slave, someone who's enslaved. And how do you do that? You pay a price. That person is now free. They're now back to their rightful kind of status as a free person. So the through line of all of this is that redemption is about some result of some real calamity in a story that then is set right by someone stepping in and saying, I want to redeem this. I want to be redemptive in this situation. And what happens at the end is there's a kind of restoration of possibility and restoration of sort of things being the way they were meant to be. And maybe if I put it that way, even though this ancient world of land being lost or freedom, we don't allow people's freedom to be lost in this way anymore, legally at least, but maybe we can all sort of feel like, oh, actually, there's a lot of ways in which our lives are not as they're meant to be. Things have been lost that never should have been lost. Even land itself is sort of treated in a way it's not meant to be treated. People are treated in that way. And thinking redemptively is thinking about what price would we have to pay to actually restore kind of freedom and proper capacity. So when you hear redemptive, but by the way, the early Christians adopt this economic word because they're trying to reflect on what they believe has happened in this kind of amazing sequence of events surrounding Jesus of Nazareth. But it doesn't start as just a religious, it's not just the property of the Christians. It's really this need that every society has to ask, how do you restore things when they've been damaged? And that's what redemptive is about.
Yeah. From your take, and as you think about culture, as you think about personal formation, as you think about the church, when did something around that idea of redemptive become, oh man, I want to really zone in a bit more on that? Do you remember the time, the place, the space where that became something that was important for you to sort of zone in on that bit?
Right. Well, I am a Christian, and so I will say that that part of becoming Christian is you do start to feel like I need rescue in my own personal life. So I'm sure that's the first time I thought about it and did very powerfully feel like rescue had come into my own story. But I think the first time I started thinking about this maybe more deeply, so I'm a white American, as we call it. I'm of European and English descent, right? But I apprenticed in the Black church in North America, the African American church, which has this amazing musical tradition called Black gospel. So I'm a piano player. And in my university days, I joined a small church, all African American except for me. And they, very much at their invitation, a very gracious invitation, they sort of taught me to play in this amazing musical language that we call Black gospel. That really is, by the way, at the source of so much of popular music generally. I mean, well, I could give you a whole. That's a separate show, Clayton. But immersing myself in a people and a heritage that is a legacy of oppression, a legacy of actual enslavement in the transatlantic slave trade, seeing the incredible resilience of that community, but also facing up to the reality of American society that in many ways, and I think this is really related to what redemption is about, we live with the damage done by exploitation in the past. Very few Americans are like actively racist or actively seeking to subjugate other people based on their race. That's I won't say it never happens, but it's not the tone of our society. It's not the intention of our society. But we live with the legacy of hundreds of years of exploitation that don't just go away when you change the law and set people free. And I think it was really then that I started thinking about redemptive as a broader category than just my own personal story, but including because I am part of this story. I have some benefits that I don't really deserve. I have a responsibility I need to take up. And I need to be part of a redemptive story. So, and then once you start thinking in that, that's a very broad societal, structural level, but it actually starts to shape how you see your own life. And you mentioned kind of personal formation. You start to see kind of deeper ways that I started to see, deeper ways that I need rescue, deeper ways I need to be redeemed, that I probably didn't appreciate when I thought of it as a narrowly religious idea, just about sin and forgiveness or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can we talk about part of that sort of personal formation?
Yeah.
Because it feels like, as you talk about redeem and redemption, that there is another party that does that redeeming, right?
Yeah,
and
that's
I think in your context, and my context as well, as we've talked about, we would say that's what Jesus has done.
Right.
But also there's parts of spiritual formation. You talk about rule of life a lot, and I'd love you to sort of talk a bit more about that. How does it balance where God's doing that work and you're doing some of that choice of redemption? Could you talk, I suppose, maybe we better start with what is rule of life and spiritual formation, and then maybe answer that question.
Yeah, I'm part of a community that is actually trying to advance what we call redemptive entrepreneurship in the world, starting new ventures that have this kind of redemptive posture, called Praxis, based in the United States. And we discovered that we needed kind of a guideline or a set of guidelines for how we would operate as a community that would move us toward a redemptive posture. I think I want to preface this by saying the real personal question for all of us is in a way, are we running away from trouble or running kind of toward the trouble that's actually there in our own lives, in our world? I don't mean like seeking trouble or causing trouble, but if your life is not whole and the world you live in is not whole, you can either try to escape that, run away from that, or you can actually run toward the problem in the hopes that really, I would say, God will use you in some way to be part of redemption. So how are you going to kind of channel your life in such a way that you, rather than kind of withdrawing from or escaping your responsibility to be part of the redemptive story, actually move toward it? And this is where we took up a very ancient idea in the Christian tradition of a rule of life, which originally this was designed for monks, people who are living kind of monastic lives in the 4th century. This emerges 4th century AD. But the sort of core insight of a rule of life is if you really want to do something worthwhile, you almost certainly need a set of disciplines and almost constraints on your life that keep you going that direction. So at Praxis, we have a 6-part rule of life that all of our core community, we're committed to rethinking how we use our time, because there's actually an interesting phrase that's in the Bible that talks about redeeming time. Time itself can be lost. You can sort of waste time. We don't want to waste time. And so there's a practice connected with each of these for time. It's actually the practice, you might think unexpectedly, of what the Hebrew Bible calls Sabbath, this practice of a rhythm of work and rest, so that I'm really rested on a weekly basis. One of the things we do is we take one day a week where we do no work. This is very unusual among entrepreneurs in particular. Entrepreneurs work all the time. They work while they're asleep. They wake up in the middle of the night. Every day you're answering email or whatever. But in our community, actually, one day a week you rest. And the purpose of that is to give us kind of deep enough reserves of energy and insight and creativity that the other 6 days a week we can be really fruitful, because we think 24/7 doesn't actually work. 24/6 is better, probably 16/6 or something like that. Then we go through some other areas. The next one is money and actually having a practice of generosity, 10% of our income giving away. So our whole community does that. That's pre-tax. I don't know if that's relevant in Australia, but in the U.S., everyone wants to know pre-tax or post-tax? Pre-tax, so gross. And then there's 4 other areas. And the goal of this is to position ourselves to be available for a deeper kind of restoration in the world than we would be if we were just kind of chasing after the things everyone else is chasing after. Yeah. So in that sense, if you want to be part of a redemptive story, like buckle up and commit yourself to some hard things that move you towards availability and towards kind of engagement with the trouble of our world. So each of these disciplines, in a way, like the Sabbath discipline, exposes the brokenness of the busyness of our world. Our world is far too anxious and busy. The tithing, that 10% giving discipline that we use, exposes the way that, especially for entrepreneurs, the world is just way too much about how much money do I make, how much value do I extract. And it's this discipline that kind of puts you in contact with the brokenness of the systems around you. But that also is what makes you potentially an agent of redemption of those systems rather than just a perpetuator of those systems.
Yeah. For you personally, as you've gone through creating your rule of life, so that's a rule of life and disciplines that are around for that group specifically. I don't know you're a part of that. How have they changed you? What have you noticed they have actually? Because it's a little bit, the idea, I believe, is the rule of life, and certainly as I've tried to put various things in my world as well, is that it's sort of the drip, drip, drip approach, right?
Yeah,
that it builds up.
That's right. That's right.
What has been the things for you?
The first 2 things that we do, there are some other practices which we could talk about too, but I actually, very fortunately, in my university days, I was like 18, I actually started practicing Sabbath. That is, one day a week, not working. The Jewish people, of course, have kept this alive their whole story, but in the Protestant world that I grew up in, it's seen as a very optional thing. But I in my first term at uni, just felt I need to actually have a rhythm like this. So I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm 57. It is absolutely a drip, drip, drip. And I will say, early in your life or early in your practice of any of these things, also with generosity, like giving away money rather than saving and investing whatever's left over. It's hard. It's very countercultural. One of the other things we do as a community is we make a time every day to pray. And you might think, well, of course, you're religious people. Of course you pray. But actually, you'd be surprised how many of us who indeed believe in God, believe we've been rescued and saved by God, still in the course of a day somehow never get around to actually talking to God. And I'm a kind of a Christian leader in the U.S., and it's embarrassing how much I need a rule that says, no, every day, stop and pray. So it's hard at the beginning, but the amazing thing about these kind of practices is that they, in the long run, generate a tremendous sense of freedom. And I am less busy now than I've ever been, I would say. As Sabbath has kind of accumulated in my life, that I remember the hurry I felt when I was younger. It may be partly age, too, but wisdom does not automatically come with age. Wisdom comes with time, and age helps with the time part. But you have to actually practice something along that road. And the freedom, I think money is the god of our world. Money is the thing most people are worshiping, including a lot of people who would say they go to church. But the thing they really spend their days devoted to, the thing they look for salvation from, is money. So if you commit that at least 10%, and my wife and I actually aim higher than that, that's kind of a baseline. If you commit to just give it away, like you're not holding on to it, you're not even spending it on something you can enjoy or you are dethroning the power of money, and therefore you become free. So we give away probably about 20% of our own income. We're very fortunate in our income, and so we're able to give away that amount. And so what happens with the other 80%? Your relationship with it changes. You don't feel attached to it in the same way. And we have just seen over and over in our lives, provision for our needs happen that just gives us such confidence to be able to continue to be generous. And I don't think that would have happened if I had not also in university, just very early on, I was making no money, decided, well, whatever I make, I'm going to give away at least 10%. And it just accumulates. Your confidence accumulates that someone is looking out for you who has your interests at heart more than you do yourself, the real redeemer, the person who's stepping into the story to transfer everything back to its proper place. You discover, God, as I would name him, God, is actually doing that. Yeah. And it's amazing to live in that reality rather than the fear and kind of anxiety that characterizes life without these practices.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it, that even the church culture does seem to be at times driven by money as well, its structures and its aspects. And so I think it is those moments, and certainly my wife and I, as we've stepped in and, we had similar situations where we said early on in our marriage, we're going to up our giving by 1% every year. We thought we could just do 1%.
Yeah.
And there's some years where it's like, we can't do this. Like, this just can't happen. And yet, God will always come through in that moment. Yeah. And there is a freedom in it. Culturally, in that perspective, we're talking sort of individually on that space or, in a couple. Culturally, whether it be church or the greater aspect, is there a way to try and redeem the fact that money isn't the answer? Or is that sort of what is going to happen in our world? And so we just individually have to sort of battle that. Is there a way to actually redeem that mindset around money?
I think there absolutely is. I do think it begins with the heart of persons. Organizations are ultimately made up of persons who are either kind of chasing after things that really will damage themselves and others, or are pursuing a redemptive way. But if you have a critical mass, especially in the leadership level of any organization, any business, I see this, it's interesting to think about how it applies to church, but I work with a lot of business founders and owners, and they're growing things. They're, of course, trying to make money because money is kind of the oxygen of business, and I think that's not a bad thing. I've seen that when the CEO is free of fear around this, the whole system rearranges to not be driven by money. we're friends in our community of entrepreneurs with a family-held company that's grown to quite a large enterprise, 500 employees, substantial revenues. I was sitting in a meeting with the CEO who oversees this, and at one point he said, "I never want to see our quarterly results." He wanted the room to know, and he said this very just casually. He was like, "You know that I never ask for our quarterly results." And the reason is we are not chasing quarterly profit. We are trying to create value in the world, and to see our quarterly results would just distract all of us from the truth. This is I don't want to be too specific because it was a private meeting, but this is a company in the oil and gas kind of space. And most of the people working for it started their careers in these big major companies that we all have heard of. It's a much smaller firm. And you could see their shoulders drop, right? And the whole room kind of changed. There were about 30 people in the room. And these are kind of all middle managers and sales executives, just to realize, oh, our CEO is not driven by the thing every system we've ever been in was driven by before. And you could see like that it was like redemption in real time and I actually talked to some of them later. They're like, "Oh yeah, I used to, when in my previous firm, I went to sales meeting every Thursday morning. I got sworn at, cussed at for an hour, because we weren't meeting our targets." And suddenly they're in this environment where their talents in sales or engineering or whatever are absolutely being used, but without the kind of pressure and anxiety and exploitation of the team that happens in these profit-driven environments. Now, this company is very profitable, and their net results year over year do very well. And you would be a very lucky person to get to own a piece of it, but not because they chase after money. And it ultimately goes back to the fact that he's quite a young man. He's like 37 years old. Second generation leading the company, that his life has been kind of changed in his own relationship to money. And then that propagates through the system. Yeah. So that it can happen. Yeah. It's very rare, but I've seen, I have an existence proof that this is possible, and we just need to multiply those, because you set people free when you're not bound to something that really enslaves people.
Yeah. There's one question that comes up as I hear that story, and I'm putting a hat on if I'm a business owner or maybe I'm a manager somewhere, not for profit, a church, and I go, I get it. That sounds great. So how do I? Don't I have to look at the book somehow to know that we're actually not losing money and therefore we're in trouble? I know it's a really practical question in that sense. So what was the mindset of that? Like you said, they're looking at the thing. Someone's looking at something, but is it the how they're looking at it? Is that what you're trying to?
Yeah. So I don't know every ins and out of this particular business, but it's certainly true that on an annual basis, they look at their net results and they try to operate with such a margin that they don't have to be driven by.
So they just know that's
They know they've got enough margin. I'm sure there's an accountant every day who reconciles the books, right? But I think it's very significant. Like that becomes a kind of, in a sense, a minor function of just keeping track of, do we have a cash flow? Is everything okay? But at the leadership level, this is, I think what's significant is at the leadership level, he's taking this redemptive posture that says there are absolutely things that he's asking about probably every day, every week, every month, every quarter. It's just not the bottom line. It's a different dashboard. It's how are we doing with our team? How are we doing with our customers? What are we hearing back from, I'm absolutely sure his office, his leadership office, is measuring and assessing lots of things. It's just not measuring this thing that really is just an accounting mechanism in the long run of the value you've actually created. And so, yes, there's someone in the system whose job is to make sure on a daily basis that we're okay on cash and all that. But the leaders, rather than micromanaging that, they're targeting what really creates value in the world, what blesses people in the world. Yeah. It's a different way but you can get there sequentially where you check in the books just very infrequently because you're checking in every day on the things that really drive true profitability.
Yeah. You shared even just with a group of us in this last couple of days, Andy, around this idea that says, well, don't just keep looking at the same structures that there is, the empire that is here now that says it's about the money, it's about the capital, it's about this, that actually if we're wanting to follow a God path of some sort. We need to look at that differently, which is exactly, I think, an example that you're sharing with us here.
Exactly.
My guest is Andy Crouch. He's partner for theology and culture at Praxis. We're going to be back with him in just a couple of minutes' time as we keep talking about what it means to redeem parts of our world. And Andy has done a lot of that around tech, not just for himself and his writing. He's lived that out. He's written about it. His family have written about it as well and are living that out. So we're going to talk a bit about that on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Andy, we're talking redemption specifically. It's a big topic for you and a big part of the work that you are doing. And I want to talk specifically around tech. You've literally written a couple of books, and I know with a family member as well around that too, around what it means to really redeem tech. Yeah. Can we start maybe with the big picture that says it just feels like, I mean, technology has been in existence and is always adapting for all of time, right? And we feel whether it's the wheel or whether it's the different warfare or whatever, suddenly it changed cultures, it changed ways dramatically. Yeah. So it's not like just digital tech but it feels like it's going on a scale that is running so fast. As you've stood back and looked at that, is that true? Are we actually running or is this just a period in time, or is this faster right now?
I think all of us feel that things are changing much faster than they ever have, and I think that is actually true because we unlocked some capabilities, really, in a sense, in the universe by discovering some things through modern science, you might say, that once we really figured out how to hook them up, turn them from science into engineering, we've been able to experience this amazing takeoff of all kinds of things, and many of them to the good, because many, many things for human beings that were very hard have gotten a lot easier for many people, though never all, which is interesting. So, I actually think technology is tools are very old. Human beings have always kind of used the world around themselves to kind of transform how they operate in the world. We use tools for that. This thing we call technology, it's both faster, Clayton, but it's also a new kind of power. And it's really the power of things that operate on their own without us. This started with machines in the Industrial Revolution. The machine is stronger than any human being. And really, you just kind of set it up, power it, and watch it go, supervise it. Initially very dangerous to supervise it, but eventually incredibly powerful machines in the world that do work, physical strength we could never do. Then we have computers that if the machines take over the strength, the computer kind of takes over the functions of the mind, the human ability to kind of think through things. And in certain domains, the computers get way better at that than us, and they do it by themselves. So for me, technology is about the era that we start to have what we would have had to have tools for before. We now have devices that just do it all on their own. And you would think, and this has been very good in many ways, but you would think this would just be all upside. But, we're talking about redemption here, and redemption is about things that have been lost and broken and calamity has happened. And the strange thing is that we are now at a point in the story of technology where we are starting to feel like there's a lot of lostness and brokenness through the very things that we brought into our lives to make our lives easier. So this is and it's accelerating. So we haven't even absorbed, really even fully the smartphone before we get social media. And then we have certainly not figured out what to do with social media and how for that to be healthy before AI arrives. And we feel like there's this kind of cascade of things that are supposed to help us and are supposed to, expand human potential in the world. And they are in some ways, but it also feels like they're really undermining human potential. Everyone's living with that. But, you mentioned family. I think in the home, I actually would say at home, at school, and in some ways at church or in religious communities, we're feeling the tensions the most of is this really helping our home? I mean, we're all, presumably anyone who has a vacuum cleaner, do you call it that here?
Yes, we do.
That everyone is sort of happy they don't have to clean their house another way. That's sort of upside. But all this other stuff we've added, is it making us happier? Is it making our lives as families richer? And frankly, I think the answer is no, it's not. Not without some redemptive action.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot about like what's redemptive life in the midst of this tsunami of technology that we're experiencing.
Yeah. And I don't think you're somebody who's trying to say, just get rid of all technology, that's the answer, right?
No.
But there is some clear principles. Would you be able to share, now, the TechWise Family is a whole book for people to go and read and do it. So I'm not asking you to go through the whole book.
For sure.
Can you, for those who perhaps maybe haven't heard about that, maybe they haven't even thought about this in that way, it's sort of just been what the life that they're living and the culture they're living.
Yes.
What are some things that they could think through?
Yeah. We have lots of technology in our own home, but I did write this book called The TechWise Family that really is in a way, the summary of what we learned as we redesigned our home to be better for all of us. I wrote the book, to be honest, most of the things we implemented are really my wife's insights. Now, my wife, by the way, and I think this is actually an important detail. My wife's a scientist. She's a physicist. She works with really sophisticated instruments in her work, and she studies our world. And so she's very adept with technology. But when it came to our home, she was way ahead of me. And as we had young children, now they're in their 20s, she was way ahead of me in saying, we need to redesign how we let these things into our home. So I would say there were a couple things. One was to put some boundaries on the use of these very useful things. Our phones go to bed in our house before we go to bed. They sleep in the kitchen. They sleep all night there. They get their little meal of electrons or whatever. And we get up before they do. So we get up in the morning. We don't just immediately turn on the screen. And creating these boundaries, and by the way, I mean, I just feel like anywhere I go, I just have to very practically say to parents, if you can make only one change, if you have a child or a teenager in your home, and for your own sake, actually, if you can get the phone out of the bedroom, it's so much healthier in every dimension for everyone. So in our home, parents and kids, no phones in bedrooms. They're asleep before we're asleep. We're awake before they're awake. And you create those margins in your day where really the most important things happen. The settling down at night to rest, the conversation that you can have with your partner at night without the screen glowing and interrupting. And then waking up in the morning and like preparing for the day and entrusting yourself to God, if you can do that, and just not being kind of driven by all the stuff that comes in through these screens. So that's been one really helpful thing. Even in my work, I use all kinds of technology in my work. Our team uses a whole stack of technology. But to do my most creative work, I have to have a rhythm. I think a rhythm of use and non-use is really important. So that's probably the one principle. But the other way I've found to think about this actually was by watching my wife and how she uses technology as a scientist. She goes into her lab. It's this very complicated place. I try to stand very still in one corner and not touch anything because really I don't know how any of it works. I'm a writer. I'm not a scientist. And as Catherine is in her lab, so if you think about technology as the story of things doing things on their own, she's actually very involved in using all these different scientific instruments. And one day I thought, oh, instruments, that's a great word for what we ought to be using our technology for. So scientific instruments help scientists, whether it's a telescope or a microscope, like extend their capacity as human beings. They're very involved in using it, even though it's very high tech. It doesn't just operate on its own. It actually helps you do something. Think about medical instruments that allow very skilled surgeons, physicians, clinicians to extend their capabilities. But that clinician still has to be present, still has to be really engaged. And there's you have to be there as a person. And by the way, there's this robotic surgery these days, but it's actually always with a human surgeon, very involved with their own skill. And I think we've had this dream that technology would sort of relieve us of having to do anything. Like it's just going to do it all for us. And AI is the latest version of this, by the way. But I think our dream, the proper dream, is that technology can actually help us be more engaged in the world. And that's a shift from kind of trying to fill our world with devices that just operate on their own to instruments that, yes, can be very high tech, but above all, involve human beings in caring for the world, caring for each other, creating new discoveries, creating new value. And really now, whenever I pick up, for instance, my phone, I try to ask, am I using this as a device that's just going to kind of distract me, replace me, sort of displace me, or am I picking up as an instrument? And if I pick it up as an instrument, I find I have a much healthier relationship with it.
Yeah. Each of these things require determination and almost a setting of expectation in what I've heard from you, and certainly what I've experienced, and I've been challenged by some of the ways you've sort of created this space as well. For somebody who sits there and says, okay, I don't want to be ruled by that phone, or I don't want to be ruled by... there is an addictive part to the social media, to the phone, to the and there's lots of research that shows all of that too. To break it is really hard. To break those aspects. So for somebody who's perhaps maybe for the first time really sitting there and thinking, like, how do you start that? And with an intent that you can actually deliver on a change in your work.
So hard things are best done with others. So I would say number one is the more this can be collective action, the easier it gets. I have a psychiatrist friend named Kurt Thompson who works with group therapy, and he points out that if you ask you or me to sit in silence, let's set a very low bar for 5 minutes, we will find it all by ourselves in a room. It's ridiculously hard. But actually, you sit in a circle of people, and you can do that quite readily. You can sit in silence for 5 minutes and sort of empty yourself of your anxieties and thoughts. So hard things require other people. So if you live with other people, it's amazing to say, hey, let's do this together. If you don't live with other people, find a friend who will sort of enter into it with you, even in your separate living spaces. Just knowing that other person is also putting their phone to bed before they go to bed and is getting up before their phone gets up, it really helps you do it. So that would be one thing. The other thing is, I would absolutely say start small. Don't try to change everything all at once. Well, actually, there's two ways. Start small, or else go big and persist through the detox period. So I have seen really wonderful things happen when families decide to take a week-long, say, holiday or trip without technology. And usually the parents see that their kids are really addicted to these things. The parents don't realize how addicted they are to it. But we say, okay, kids, come on, let's go. We're going to go, camping or whatever. So I'll tell you what will happen. The first 3 days will be hell on earth for everyone. And this is partly because the parents discover, I'm way more dependent on this thing. I probably check it more than my kid does almost. And your kids are going to say, I hate you. You're going to have these fights. It's going to feel awful. It is always, I can tell you, almost always for 1/3 of the time, however long. If you do this for 2 days, it'll be like the first 12 hours. If you do it for a week, it'll be the first 2.5 days. And then something happens. I promise you, something happens. And I guess the best word that I can think of for it is a kind of emptiness. You stop fighting. You stop being mad. You don't really know what to do. People get very quiet. There's a couple of days of like, not sure what is next. And then emerges rediscovery. Rediscovery of each other, rediscovery of the beautiful world that doesn't come to us through screens. And it ends up being amazing. But you have to go through the first third and that kind of middle period of kind of disorientation, emptiness, not being sure. I promise you there's rediscovery. So really you can, start a small practice at home. But I would say the cold turkey, together, dive into a different way and live through the disorientation. You have to live through the disorientation and the rupture. But there's this amazing word, I think it's one of the best news in the world, is this word neuroplasticity, which means your brain can rewire itself. This is incredibly good news for addicts. No matter what you're addicted to, it can be very difficult if it's an actual chemical addiction, but you can get through it. Your brain will rewire. Same with our addiction to our devices. Same with your kids' dependence on their phone or whatever it is. Neuroplasticity is like the best news in the world. It's basically hang on there through the detox and you'll discover a new way and you'll come home and then you can put in place some new practices that keep that good rediscovery going.
Yeah. And it's funny because the neuroplasticity and certainly some groups that I've worked with as well, that the key on those first few days is that if we imagine like a little pathway beaten through a forest or something, that's what you've done with whatever the current thing is. And so your brain wants to keep going down that
Absolutely.
pathway. You're trying to,
That's the
you're
easy
trying to
way.
beat a new path.
Yes,
and
yes,
so
yes.
eventually it gets overgrown the other path, and eventually
Yes.
the new path comes. And so that's why it takes
Yes.
time, right? It can't just be a one
Yep.
moment and there
Yep.
we go. Yeah.
About 10 years ago, while I was writing this book, The Tech-Wise Family, I realized I was actually going downstairs. So the phone was downstairs, but I was not waking up much before it. I literally walked downstairs, pick up the phone, look at all the notifications. I was like, this is not right. So I decided I would start going out of doors every morning before I look at a screen. I've now done this for 10 years. And the first 2 weeks, that's really what you said about the beaten path. You're so used to it. You're so comfortable with it. It was a ridiculous spiritual struggle to not pick up my phone. I would make my tea, and so I'd be standing in the kitchen. It was like the phone was whispering to me the whole 3 minutes that it takes to make the tea. Don't you need to check me? Don't you want to try me? Won't it be good to know what's going on? And I'd have to be like, no, right? But about 2 weeks in, it was like a switch flipped, truly. And I heard that little whisper, as it were, from the phone, don't you want to check me? And instead of feeling like drawn and like temptation and I need to resist, I felt this just total flip, a feeling of revulsion, like, no way. Like, there's this beautiful world out there. I'm about to be outside. Why would I check you? And literally ever since, I've never felt that call have any draw on me. But it was 2 weeks of embarrassing levels of spiritual struggle just not to pick up my phone. And then suddenly I'm free. I would love to have everybody have that experience.
And there is breakthrough, like you said. I think
There is. Yes.
It's not just you, Andy. There's person after person who said, hey, if I go on these journeys, there does come that moment, exactly as you said, there's a breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
And so find those people as well who maybe done it with you and have those conversations. I think that's a great opportunity. We've talked a bit about that sort of personal redemptive opportunity, especially with tech and things like that. You've been in Australia for a week. I'm sure you know a bit of the culture previously as well. Corporately, and maybe we could start from a church perspective, a corporate church perspective here in Australia. Is there things that you see that you go, well, you know what, I think this could be an opportunity for redemption that is in this culture, in this space at the moment, that maybe as somebody who's a bit of an outsider to that, you've noticed?
Wow.
Sorry, big question without notice.
That is a really big question. And based on my deep
one
week understanding.
Right.
Well, I think one thing that is so open for redemption, in some ways in every culture, but maybe I see some parallels here with the U.S. This land is one that has drawn this continent, a nation, has drawn so many people to it. There's all these kind of waves of immigration, and I think that's always kind of a beautiful and tragic story that our parents felt they had to leave and came to this land where they may or may not have been treated well, where they had to find their own way. And if you think about the church, the chance of the church to, first of all, especially meet the latest waves of arrival and say, you also are welcome here, and there's a place for you, and here's a home for you, for people who, for whatever reason, have left their home. Even if they left it all for the upside, like, wow, we have this amazing economic opportunity, you still get here and you realize we don't know who we are anymore, and we don't know who our kids are going to become. And so to welcome the newly arrived, and then also to kind of address the pain of the intergenerational pain of the difference between the first generation who arrives and their kids, who are much more assimilated, and to create a kind of space where people can work through that, let alone, of course, the relationships between those who arrived in the recent centuries and the first nations of the land who were here from time out of mind, and who also need to be given a chance to be honored and also to process like the losses of the complexification of this land. I mean, at a very large scale, these are the kinds of things. I mean, the church ought to be able to tackle the largest scale issues. And the church, because God, we believe, has called people to himself from every nation, the church has this kind of multinational or multicultural breadth to address these issues. The problem is we're often afraid, honestly, of bringing it up because there's personal pain, there is shared collective pain, there's conflict, there's histories of violence,
Shame, perhaps.
shame.
As well,
Yes. So, like, those are all reasons to run away from trouble, as we said earlier in the program. But this is like a set of things that the church could be so redemptive in. I think the other thing that this is something probably we have in common as nations. I mean, we just have to wrestle with how blessed we are economically and how fortunate we are, we say. But economic prosperity is fortune, and it's also dangerous spiritually. And so the question of how we have grown so rich and what we do with that and how we use that to bless the rest of the world, maybe especially our neighbors, like in the United States, we have contiguous neighbors. You have neighbors around you across an ocean, but you've got nations very nearby who don't have the same level of material advantage, but who do know some things about being human that actually we forget when we get very prosperous. And I think not seeing the prosperity of this nation as something to just kind of conserve, but actually as something to risk and as a resource to risk that gives you freedom to travel, gives you freedom to give things away or to welcome people in or whatever. That would be, to me, the other great opportunity. And if you don't do that, you actually will become a prisoner of affluence. And there was this great documentary a few years ago called Affluenza, like influenza, but worse, because influenza only affects your body, but affluenza affects you might say your soul, but also your relationships. It weakens the relationships between families. It weakens the relationships between neighbors, and ultimately between like citizens and their government. And it's very dangerous. And so I think the church can play a role. The church, again, is kind of multinational by design, includes people of all levels of economic attainment. And the church can connect the prosperous with the less economically prosperous, but the poor in spirit are often actually the people who know the most about real life. So I would say your abundance is an opportunity, but also, if not taken seriously, it's actually a very subtle threat to long-term well-being. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope that's not too presumptuous for me to say.
No, I think it is a good challenge that is pulling us back to this idea of what does it mean to be a redemptive people and also a person in itself. We haven't talked about personhood. You've got great examples around what that definition is and all those sorts of things, but we've run out of time. Andy, I've done hundreds, thousands of interviews, and I don't think I've ever asked this question, and so I'm going to flip it for you. As there's a whole group of people who are perhaps hearing you and you give so much of yourself in so many areas around the world in who you are. For those who maybe, and we know there's a large audience, those who maybe don't have a faith, but there's those who do and are praying people. What could people be praying for you? They're never going to meet you, perhaps. They won't ever be that. What right now across Australia and New Zealand that people who would be able to pray for you?
My goodness. Well, pray for the safeguarding of the parts of my life that are not public. There's a great risk in being a public person. You and I can have an amazing conversation that is meant for the public, but I'll be on a plane for a long time to go home, and I'll be with my wife, and can I have the same level of intensity and attention to her as I give when it's a public event? So pray, and many public people lose the most important parts of their lives, and I don't think in danger of that per se, except that it's an endemic danger. So pray for my inner life, for my integrity, for the hidden things. I care for a mother who has dementia. No one will ever see that. I would not even normally bring it up if you hadn't asked. But like pray for the hidden places are what matter most. And there's a line in Paul, I'm not sure I'm going to quote it exactly right off the cuff, but pray that boldness would be given to me to proclaim the truth, we might say. And our world is in great need of truth. I don't have all the truth, but I'm trying to be a servant of the truth. I'm trying to learn the truth. And I think our world is very, very, you can go a long time without hearing the truth about life in the world. And I want to be someone who proclaims the truth. So that takes boldness. And I'd love for prayers for boldness in the right way to proclaim the truth.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Andy is author of a heap of books. He's written articles. He's got podcasts. Where if you have not engaged with Andy's work, please do, because it is always life-giving. And it's been wonderful to spend a bit of time with you today. Andy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andy Crouch, my guest here on Towards Understanding.